Hello everyone, my name is Charlie Arden-Clarke. I'm the head of the Secretariat of the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption production. I'd like to welcome you to this UNITAR UNEP training module on sustainable consumption and production. I'm going to be talking to you about the global and regional agenda on sustainable consumption and production and some of the recent developments. In 2012, in June, we had in Rio the UN Conference on Sustainable Development. At that conference, countries adopted the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production patterns, which we call for short the 10YFP. This is a global capacity building framework to help the entire world shift towards more sustainable consumption and production patterns. This adoption of this framework in 2012 dramatically raised the profile of sustainable consumption and production on national and the global policy agenda. Since then, there's been another extremely important development with the adoption of the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development in New York in September 2015. That agenda has at its core 17 Sustainable Development Goals. There is one Sustainable Development Goal, number 12, which is entirely about sustainable consumption and production. And the language in that goal is ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. And this too has dramatically increased the focus on SCP worldwide. It's also a fact that targets in 12 of the other Sustainable Development Goals, that is out of a total of 17, have targets in them that relate to sustainable consumption and production. This 2030 Agenda and the 17 SDGs, with their nearly 50 targets relating to SCP, means once again that sustainable consumption production has moved up governments' agendas and indeed up the agenda of all stakeholders involved in sustainable development. The issue of sustainable consumption production is also very important in Africa for a number of reasons. It is important because sustainable consumption production is a huge opportunity for Africa. The continent is still developing. It has a lot of resources. It has a rapidly growing population. But if those resources are used more efficiently and with less pollution, there will be far more development benefits and far more human welfare gains from this more efficient use of resources. At the same time, Africa, because it has a less intensive form of agriculture, for example, where organic agriculture flourishes, that continent has the opportunity to produce more sustainable products, which will find a very ready market in many developed countries. The 10YFP, the programs in the 10YFP, the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production patterns, will help Africa secure some of those markets. There is a program on sustainable food systems. There is another program on consumer information. There is another program on sustainable tourism. This implies that, through the activities in those programs, private companies and other stakeholders in Africa will be better able to produce sustainable food, provide the information to consumers to identify that sustainable food, and thus secure markets not just in their own region, but in major developed country markets, as I've mentioned, like those in Europe and North America. We also have in Africa a large regional project funded by the European Union called Switch Africa Green, and in 6 countries in Africa that is working in specific sectors to help those countries shift to more sustainable production methods and in some cases find new markets for those products. Agriculture is very much one of those sectors. There are also important activities on energy and on waste management and also on building and cities. And so we have a situation where we have a large regional project encompassing 6 countries, but with a regional policy support element, which sits alongside the programs in the 10YFP, so that we can develop synergies between activities under both frameworks, under the global 10YFP and under the regional Switch Africa Green. I think the importance of the Switch Africa Green project, which started now slightly less than 2 years ago, is it gives a kind of regional boost to the global 10YFP. It puts, additional financial and technical resources into Africa. It focuses them on 6 countries. It has a network facility that helps exchange best practices and experience within Africa. It has country projects which enable specific country level activities to move forward. And it has a policy support component which generates policy recommendations and capacity building tools for policymakers so that those 6 countries, but indeed all African policymakers, can benefit from some of the outputs of that particular capacity building project. And there is an African regional roadmap which countries in Africa have developed with the idea of trying to forge a common agenda on SCP. Whilst each country has certain specific needs, you can, out of those individual needs and priorities, develop a common agenda which enables you to collaborate within Africa and with Africa's international partners to make this shift to SCP. And that is the purpose of the African Regional Roadmap of the 10YFP, is to help partners coalesce around the shared part of the sustainable consumption and production agenda in Africa, to secure economies of scale and to focus on things that focus on activities which benefit, a number of countries, not just individual ones. We do hope that this training module is very useful to you, that it gives you a good introduction to SCP at both a global level and in the more particular context of Africa. And as head of the 10YFP Secretariat, I would urge you to learn more about the 10YFP and to consider joining this global framework as one of our partners so we can move together towards sustainable consumption and production patterns. Thank you very much for listening.